This is all about bringing BP's net zero ambition to life. In Lingen, we have just started to produce sustainable aviation fuel with bio feedstock. We believe that this is a great example of how we can contribute to Aim 3 and deliver on the reduction in the life cycle carbon intensity of our products. BP has invested in our site to establish a completely new way to replace crude oil fractions with biocomponents. The biocomponent that we use is used cooking oil. This method is called co-processing. We are the first refinery in Germany which does this on an industrial scale. This is not only about accelerating the greening of BP and Lingen refinery, but also about helping the aviation sector to decarbonize.
Die Herausforderung bei diesem Projekt lag in der Kürze der Zeit und der hohen Komplexität. Wir haben dafür eine neue Entladestelle am Hafen gebaut, sowie einen Tank aufgerüstet und eine neue Verbindung zum Hydrocracker hergestellt. All das haben wir mit unseren Partnern in einem hervorragenden Zusammenspiel realisiert.
Da beim Co-Processing das biogene Öl gemeinsam mit dem Rohöl in den vorhandenen Anlagen verarbeitet wird, war kein aufwendiger Anlagenneubau erforderlich. So können wir die bestehende Anlage mit einigen Modifikationen weiter betreiben. Wir sehen uns hier als Pioniere und bauen unser Wissen und unsere Technologie zur Produktion nachhaltiger Kraftstoffe kontinuierlich aus.
This is just the start of a journey to a low-carbon future of refineries. I am confident that we have the right people, the right skills and the right attitude to take the opportunities that the energy transition offers.
Thanks to Air BP. We now have two panel debates to end our formal programme today. And both of those are focused around sustainability, the massive issue facing this industry. First up, we're going to look at the role of policy making and the role that will play among EU airline efforts to deliver on their decarbonisation targets, both in the short and the longer term. And to lead us through this panel, I'd like to welcome our moderator, energy and climate journalist, Anna Gumbau.
I'm not used to live applauses anymore. That's great. All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to, I believe it's meant to be another important and exciting session ahead in this A4E summit. If there is a word to describe the EU policy context, I think that's it. It's exciting, it's intense. It's a very intense period that I think all of us dealing with EU decision-making and the ongoing reforms are facing, which includes myself. My name is Anna Gumbau. I'm an EU climate and energy journalist in Brussels, and I will be hosting this specific session. And in this session, we're going to be zooming into the Brussels context, into the EU policy context. There's many proposals currently under legislation and under review. So what we are going to be seeing is how these different proposals under the Fit for 55 package can bring the aviation sector to incentivize sustainable aviation fuels. What is the level of ambition required? What are the challenges? But I think also very importantly, what are the opportunities that the ongoing review is presenting? So I'm delighted to be welcoming, I think what is a stellar lineup of speakers today. So on my left, there's Mr. Søren Gade. He's a member of the European Parliament. We also have Andreea Moyes. She's Global Aviation Sustainability Director at Air BP. Fagernäs, Vice President of Sustainability with Norwegian. And Mark Brownstein, Vice President for Energy at the Environmental Defense Fund. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us on stage this afternoon. Now, before we hear from our panelists, it would be very interesting to hear from you. The good people at Airlines for Europe have put together a Slido poll, and would be great to hear your thoughts to kind of, understand a little bit like what's the temperature in the room at the moment, to see like how all of you feel about the ongoing policy regulations. So you can connect to Slido using the code that it's right here, A4E Summit. Just going to give you a few seconds to all of you to be connecting. So we're starting with a a question which says, what percentage of European aviation CO2 emissions were generated from long-haul flights departing from European airports in 2019? Is it 27%? Is it 68%? Is it 48% or 52%? Let's get your comments, your answers. I'm just going to give you a few seconds. Most of you are looking at the screen, which I believe that you are eagerly waiting for the results. We have a majority of you who think that it's 68%, followed that about 12% of you saying that it's just 27%, 52%, and then the least number of you think it's 48%. So, let's just try to get the final votes. I think it's stabilizing here. So the 10% of you got the question right. So it was 48% of European aviation CO2 emissions that were generated from long-haul flights departing from European airports in 2019. So congrats to this 10%. Got it right. Well, now 13. We're catching up now. All right. So if I can get the next question, please. Yeah. Which one of the following is the most effective means by which the EU can push for greater CO2 emissions reductions from aviation by 2030? Quick disclaimer here, there is no right or wrong answer this time. So that's really your thoughts. Refuel EU Aviation is starting really strong. I think while we're still waiting for some final responses, I think we have a clear winner that the Refuel EU Aviation will become the most effective means by which the EU can push for greater CO2 reductions. Follow neck to neck between the EU emissions trading system and CORSIA. So that's going to be an interesting subject of debate. And then there's 3% of you at the moment who think that taxation can be the most effective means. Indeed, I think we have a clear winner this time. No need to dwell too much into deep with that. So if I can get the third and last question. It's a yes or no or unsure question. Will Europe be capable of advancing its ambitious aviation climate policies, SAF, carbon reduction targets, carbon pricing at global level? What do you guys think? Right, we're seeing the room quite divided. There's a few undecided, but then we're seeing a very neck-to-neck, I think, competition between those who think that it can bring this ambition to the global level and those who don't think so. Just a couple more seconds. The yes has a slight advantage at the moment, but we will definitely be able to tackle, I think, the global context and how and if the EU can bring its influence and its ambition to a global level. So thank you very much to all of you for participating. Before we are kicking off the panel, a reminder that you can ask questions through Slido. I believe it's the same hashtag, so please make sure to address any questions that you would want to see answered, and hopefully we'll have some time to address them during the panel or at the end of the panel. So, so based on that, I would like to start by turning to Mr. Søren Gade, a member of the European Parliament. We have a massive, I think, task ahead of aligning the EU's energy, climate, transport legislation into the higher emissions reduction targets. So you've been mentioning right now, we're just talking on the sidelines, how the Refuel EU Aviation is keeping you very busy, and you're still going to have to speak about it for a little longer, I'm afraid. But I would like to first start by asking you, why does it matter so much to get this EU policy framework right, to make sure that these different proposals we are talking about are coherent, and how can we achieve that?
I mean, decarbonization in the aviation industry is important. We heard it from the CEOs, and all the companies are already doing a lot. What we can do on the European level is, of course, trying to keep the level playing field. We want to do something, but we also have to realize that everything come with a cost. We have to make sure that our companies in Europe can still compete with other companies, and we just saw the figures. I mean, it's 6 or 8% of those planes leaving the Union. They stand for around 50% of the carbon footprint. And of course, if we do it wrong, we will kill some companies, because then you will have a stopover maybe in Turkey or in a hub in the Middle East. So we have to decarbonize, but we also have to do it in a clever way. I fully accept and acknowledge that the aviation industry is still recovering for the COVID, and I also acknowledge and realize that it's still tough times. I mean, you have maybe airports owned by governments. They're just throwing a bill after companies who lost 450 million passengers in a period of time. So I know that this is tough, and I realize that this is also something I will speak up to my colleague, telling them. Now, when it comes to the European Parliament, it is everybody has an opinion on aviation. I'm from the TRAN committee, and I'm the rapporteur on this particular Refuel Europe. And then, of course, you have the Envy, and the Envy people. They have maybe slightly a different view than we have in the TRAN committee. But it is my task after the Commission came with their proposal. I do a draft, and this draft, there will be comments from other political groups on this. There's been tabled 439 amendments. Some of you, ladies and gentlemen, in this room, you are probably behind some of them. And then I have to look into those amendments to see if I can find a way out, so to speak. So I need from now on and up until maybe June, July, to make a compromise inside the Parliament among the 7 political groupings. And we have 705 members, so yeah, you do the math, and I just need to do it as broad as possible. When I have my file and it is being voted in plenary, this is my suggestion, and then there is the Commission's suggestion, as you already know, a proposal, and then you have the Council, the ministers. And of course, you have just met the Commissioner, so she will have the proposal for the Commission, I will have the proposal for the Parliament, and then you will have who has the presidency after the French, that's the Czech presidency, and then we will go into a trilogue, and in this trilogue we will try to find the proposal that will be, the one you will have to stick to up until 2050. And I can assure you that I've had 40, 50, 60 meetings together with Jesper, my assistant, and Frederica from Renew, and I think we have met a very lot of stakeholders on this particular file. And of course, it is my intention to do it in a way so I will be welcomed also by you maybe next year, in the sense that I do know that it is important for you, but I also can tell you that a lot of politicians inside the Parliament know how important aviation industry actually is. It's not only that the connectivity, but it's everything around aviation industry, tourism, trade, everything. There's so many things that is bundled to aviation industry. So I'm pretty confident that we will find solutions to some of the big issues. And we have heard maybe a little about the feedstock base. What should it be? Because the feedstock base will also be, decisive how much SAF we can actually do, what to be included. That is in the RED directive. I have nothing to do with the RED directive. I know that my file is very dependent on the RED directive. It is under, they're also looking into the RED, what should be in it. So there are so many questions, and you, ladies and gentlemen, know a lot about them. The time schedule, as I said, we can take it into the TRAN committee maybe in May, June, and in plenary in June, July, and then hopefully we'll have a trilogue meeting. Hopefully it will be in no later than July, and then there will be a summer break, and we'll start up again in September, and then, then hopefully in autumn we will have the final result. I've also said to those I've had meetings with, please reach out to my office if there's something in the process you hear and you think I need to know, because my door is open, and Jesper, he will take care of it, and it will be taken into consideration. We are still in the process, so it is not too late if you have any remarks you think I should be aware of. I think I'll leave it here, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gade. If I could turn now to Mark Brownstein, and talk a little bit about let's say the level of ambition needed in Europe, and also looking at the global context. What do you think is the level of ambition required in Europe to incentivize sustainable aviation fuels, and also looking at the global context? Can Europe lead in that? Also going back to the question that we had just seen on whether can Europe take a global leadership on that?
Well, to my way of thinking, it's not just that Europe can lead. I think in many respects Europe is leading. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have two fundamental challenges in front of us. One, of course, is the climate challenge. And in fact, there will be a report coming out next week from the IPCC, which just underscores how much we have yet to do in order to be able to respond to the climate crisis. And this follows a number of reports that have come out over the last 6 months that really underscore the fact that the climate crisis is bearing down on all of us, and just about every country in the world is feeling the effects of climate change even now. But we also need to note that the very same day that the UN put out its most recent science report on the effects of climate change, well, that was the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And so we really have a twin challenge in front of us, because what we, I think, are coming to understand is that the dependence of our economy on oil and on gas is not sustainable from an energy security standpoint any more than it's not sustainable from an environmental standpoint. And so these twin challenges point us in the same direction, and that is to move our economies away from oil and gas dependence. Of course, we spent a lot of time this morning talking about SAF. So I look at SAF as a critical strategy, both from a global energy security standpoint and from a climate stability standpoint. And in that regard, Europe has done some of the leading work, I think, in helping to begin to define what acceptable SAF looks like, both in terms of focusing on those biological feedstocks that are in fact sustainable and differentiating them from those that are not, but also making sure that the mandate for SAF includes a carve-out for advanced fuels, electro-derived fuels, because ultimately, as has been talked about, the biological feedstocks are not rich enough, not deep enough to be able to satisfy the full need of what we need for aviation. So we're going to need to move to hydrogen-based feedstocks. And so I think Europe has done both the world a great service by being so rigorous in how it's defining SAF and in terms of pointing in the direction of what we need to do for advanced fuels. Of course, right, the challenge now is to turn those good intentions into actual deployed production capacity, right? And there, I do think it is a combination of making sure we have the right pricing policies. In other words, that there is a cost to putting carbon into the atmosphere, and therefore an incentive to find and deploy low carbon fuels. But then also to have the right tax policies in place. And here, this is one place where I think the United States can probably play show some advantages. Having the right tax policies in place to make sure that it is tax advantageous to produce those fuels.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mark, for also providing this broader global perspective into it. Now, if I can turn to Andreea, from a full supplier perspective, and RBP being involved in deploying SAFs, what are the obstacles that we risk finding when trying to incentivize SAF, and how can the EU policy framework make sure that sustainable fuels become the norm sooner rather than later, I'd say?
I just want to talk first about the energy transition. This is happening outside of aviation across all sectors, and it's not a train that's going back, so this is happening. And we're looking at SAF as just a component of the energy transition for our company. We've announced our goals of being a net zero company in 2050, and that includes not just our operations, but also all the products and services we produce and sell, including traded products. But for us, what's important now is what we're going to do in 2030. So for 2030, we're already in action looking at many different projects that include a variety of products for all sectors. And SAF is a component of these integrated energy projects. So the way we look at this problem to solve it is we need green electrons, we need green hydrogen, we need green liquids, and as part of that portfolio, SAF is just one of them, yes? So we heard a lot talked about biofeedstocks and electrofuels and so on. The reality is some of these feedstocks are rich in carbon and some are rich in hydrogen, and we actually see synergies across all types of feedstocks, which is why we're always talking to anyone that wants to listen, especially in policy. This is something that's very important to us. Having a wide base of feedstocks is important because that flexibility of combining different resources is going to unlock scale for SAF. Mm-hmm. So I think scale is the biggest obstacle, just to come back to your question. And for scale, we need lots of options. In different regions of the world, we see different advantages in Europe versus US versus Middle East and so on. And our job is to develop technology and utilize the technology that we have to develop SAF, the appropriate types of SAF in all regions based on the feedstocks that we have available.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much, Andreea. Anders, with Norwegian, I think you have the role of starting to comment a little bit on what other speakers have been mentioning. And I think from your perspective, it would be interesting to know also, I mean, Norwegian comes from Norway, duh. So how do you think, as the first country that has set up a SAF blending mandate, how do you think this could incentivize the uptake of sustainable aviation fuels? And what do airlines need to be able to incentivize and comply with this mandate?
I think for all industry, it's predictability is the key. And I think Brussels is the place in Europe that can deliver that type of predictability when it's at its best. So having a mandate in place that secures a level playing field, that secures competitiveness so that we can compete on this with the same rules, and that we don't, see the types of diversions where we fly unnecessarily and thus have carbon leakage, I think is really, really important. And I think what I'm missing is someone that has the bird's eye view on all of these different files. Because in the end, what we're seeking is decarbonization. At the moment, this process is going very fast. And it is difficult as an airline to start taking in all the implications when we're doing our investment analysis. So getting it predictable and getting it predictable fast, and then balance that towards not having to revise it all in 3 years' time, I think is important. So for us, a concept of hurrying slowly, and I'm reassured by Søren here, who has taken a very broad view, speaks to many different actors, and I hope that in this process that the US have also taken their approach, which is more carrots and less sticks. I hope that also in Brussels there will be some carrots to those who want to go first.
Mm-hmm. Right. So again, as mentioned earlier, please feel free to send in any questions on Slido. We'd be able to pick up some of them. So I believe there's a lot of issues to be addressing here, and wait, you would want to, Mr. Gade, you would want to respond quickly, right?
Maybe just a remark. I mean, predictability, I know that is very important for the industry, and we'll try to give it. This is about reviewing. I mean, there will be a review after every second or third year, but that goes in both directions. I mean, if we do something wrong and it's hitting the industry very hard, of course it should be revised and then it should be reopened. So it's not just to make it tougher each and every year. When we decide a blending mandate, that is the one we will go for. If something happened technology-wise, of course, then it could be nice to look into. One of the issues that's actually on the table right now is this about national targets. Should it be able to put national targets on top of the blending mandate decided in the Parliament? And my view is that there should not be. I mean, you can do it on a voluntary basis in the member states. You can go do an agreement with an airline company. You can compensate this airline company for doing so on a voluntary basis, and you can stick to the state aid regulation, and you can do it. But if we have a certain amount of staff, we put it on the provider. The fuel supplier will commit themselves to do whatever is in the blending mandate, and this is the amount of staff we have. And you are not a better human being because you said up in the rich north, now I want to go higher than maybe the 8%, and then you just take it away from some maybe not so wealthy country in the south. At the end of the day, climate do not recognize borders anyway. So if you have like 8%, you will have used 8% at the end of the day, but you can do something on top, voluntary, as I see it. But this is going to be one of the fights inside the Parliament, but also in the trilogue within maybe the Commission. They do not want to have higher national targets. I do not want to have it, but there might be a majority, I don't know, in the Parliament, and they are working on it also in the Council, and there is still no majority saying there should be higher national targets. But I don't know where it ends.
Anders.
I think that is completely on the line with the industry position as well, and I think one of the aspects of this entire file and all these policies also, we need to flip the coin. So instead of treating the aviation industry, pardon my French, as a whip boy and a cash cow, pointing the stick, I think there's a massive potential for industry building. And I think that's also, coming from Norwegian's perspective, that's where you can tap into national funds as well. So if you allow that type of voluntary mechanism, and I agree, blending mandate, minimum requirement, it shouldn't be blending mandate as a policy tool in the member states. But if if Denmark or Sweden or Finland or Germany or Norway wants to build a massive industry because they see the potential, they see the jobs, they see right now possibly also energy security, then it's no longer a commercial business case only. That that builds it as a case for society and public funding, and we need public funding to lift this. There is no way that we as airlines can vertically integrate fuel production into our supply chains when we know that it costs, I don't know, 8 billion NOK, so maybe close to €1 billion to put up 100,000 ton factory, and we would require 3 of them by 2030.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to add something to that. We see a lot of interest from many different parties, corporations, passengers, to purchase SAF, but we do need this like minimum level of mandates that we know it's a demand for sure, and that's coming because to build $1 billion plant, you need to know that there is demand for that product. And I think once we have that base, we can definitely continue to build on a voluntary basis. And certainly some governments in Europe and US have offered a lot of carrots for parties that are interested in contributing to the SAF development to do so. And it's working quite well, but mandates are certainly necessary to provide a minimum base necessary for investment.
Mark, do we require more sticks?
Well, there's maybe a third pool of money here that we should be thinking about, because the same set of geopolitical dynamics that have roiled the energy markets are also the same set of dynamics that have created a number of windfalls to traditional fuel providers and traditional fuel producers. Wood Mackenzie, about 2 weeks ago, put out a report that suggested that today's oil prices, Exxon, Chevron, Shell, Total, BP, collectively, by the end of the year, will have $200 billion of free cash flow. $200 billion of free cash flow.
It's 200 factories.
Okay. That's a lot of money. And that creates new opportunities to take some of that free cash flow. And of course, no one is suggesting that shareholders of those companies be deprived of a certain amount of reward. But there's a lot of money to go around. And so that suggests that there are opportunities to take that windfall that comes from a tragedy, frankly, but we can use that to our collective advantage to begin to invest in the kind of production capacity that not only helps us turbocharge our efforts to develop SAF, turbocharge our efforts to decarbonize our transportation system, but also reduce our collective dependence on oil and gas into the future, which helps promote greater energy security for us all. And so whether that comes through a government taxing mechanism to internalize that windfall, or whether the companies themselves want to take the opportunity to accelerate their own decarbonization strategies, and every one of these companies I listed has talked about a decarbonization strategy, it does suggest that we can take out of the challenge, we have some new opportunities.
Can I allow for one quick reaction over here? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in. Yes, Andreea.
I think that's exactly what's happening. We have billions of dollars of investments announced. We have quadrupled the pipeline of renewable power projects from 2019. So in just 3 years, we have now 24 gigawatts of renewable power project potential at BP. Just with the results that we announced in February, which was, I think, before Ukraine was attacked, we announced 3 standalone projects for SAF and 2 biorefinery conversions. So we're definitely in action, and we're doing this because we see the opportunity and the need to help the world decarbonize. But once these projects are on the ground, we also need to make sure that there are companies that can afford to purchase those products, and they will thrive doing so, and the passengers will continue to travel. And for this, having policies that bring it all together is very important for us as an investor.
And if I may comment as well, I guess Air BP's shareholders are used to quite high returns on their capital investment, which also means that I don't expect Air BP to sell the fuel under production cost. And that means that for the foreseeable future, until 2035, it will still be at a massive price premium to the fossil for us as airlines.
And I don't suggest that there's any one tool in the toolbox that's the silver bullet, right? I do think that, though, when we talk about the strategies that help accelerate the transition and that bring new fuels to market, that is the combination of policy, demand, but also investment on the part of suppliers. Collectively, these 5 companies have talked about investing $25 billion in energy transition by 2030. $200 billion of free cash flow this year alone, right? So again, tremendous opportunity now to take what is a tragic situation and one that has us all on our back foot and now turn it into a positive opportunity for both global energy security and climate stability.
One last comment on this. Yes, please, Anders.
I'll try to be short. I think we, as the airlines, we accept that a mandate provides predictability and an investment signal. But we also see that the effect in the short to medium term is that you're increasing demand without increasing supply. And that only, what we are seeing is that it increases the price gap. So we're trying to fix a market failure by introducing more market failures to the system. And I think that is also what the policy needs to take into account. And I think in the EU perspective and from Airlines for Europe, there is an idea of introducing a SAF allowances scheme. And the scheme, it connects EU ETS with the Refuel EU Aviation, where you get one carrot, so you get one EU ETS allowance for a bio ton, and then you get, or CO2 emissions from a bio ton, and then you get 2 from an electro ton. And that way, you basically level the playing field with the US tax credit system. You provide a mechanism to relieve the airlines of the extra cost for 5 years in this proposal. It's not affecting the EU ETS cap because it's taken from the auctioned allowances. And this will also, build in affordability and connectivity into the system. So I think there are solutions. And to me, right now, seeing what we're seeing with mostly sticks and the EU Innovation Fund, which is focused on technology development and nothing on deployment, to me that should be one of the hot topics of the debate in the European Parliament and also in the trilogues to get that in place on an EU level.
Mr. Gade, maybe I can pair 2 questions together that we're getting from the audience. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion around how do we make it more affordable, how do we incentivize SAF. So we have the first question from Sustainable Aviation, who says that an EU mandate as such says nothing about the price of SAF. So what can we learn about this system of incentives as subsidies, for instance, what we have in the US? And then shouldn't carbon pricing instead of SAF mandates be prioritized to trigger the decarbonization of the sector? What do you think?
Sure, you said again, should. What?
Shouldn't carbon pricing instead of SAF mandates?
Well, I mean, when you saw the proposal from the Commission, they have worked for this for a very long time indeed. They have access to scientists. The figures in the Commission proposal, I do not question it. I mean, I'm a member of the European Parliament. I don't have like 100 scientists who will provide me with other figures than the Commission figures. So this is the basic, and I don't question that. And then, of course, we have to look into whether there should be a little e-fuel right from the beginning, trying to create a market. So, and when we put it on the fuel supplier, I mean, it should also be achievable. The goal should be achievable. Of course, the pricing is, I don't know where it actually ends. I discussed it today together with Jesper. We had a meeting with the TRAN secretariats. And, we are trying to look into a mechanism so we can avoid that airline companies will be, misused in an unfair, higher prices. So I don't know how to do it, but we are looking into it just to give a mechanism so that you're not robbed every day. You have to fuel your planes with SAF. So that is one of the things we're looking into. This question about definition of SAF and how it will, I mean, for me it's very important to stress that we don't feed our airplanes with food, and it has to be reliable among the consumers that we actually, it is a green, we try to decarbonize aviation, and we do it in a right way so the consumer can rest assured that it is actually what we are doing. So that was a very good question, but also very important. And I also think for the CEOs, for the airline companies, they don't want to risk their reputation by trying to cheating customers.
And actually, I think that's an excellent point, because the same geopolitical conditions that are putting upward pressure on pricing, right, are also putting upward pressure on food and food supply. And the thing that will kill SAF the quickest is if there's a connection made in the public's mind between alternative fuels on the one hand and food costs and food supply on the other. So if the science isn't enough for one to avoid that, then certainly the politics are enough to really try to hold that very bright line. And frankly, this is a place where Europe and European policymakers, to your credit, are doing a much better job than American policymakers are. And this is something that, I think will be part of the US debate going forward, because for all the productivity that we've had out of places like California, we've got very loose definitions right now on what is acceptable SAF in the United States, and that has to be fixed. Otherwise, it will give a bad name to the entire enterprise.
Because at the end of the day, we're also seeing a very similar debate on the broader climate and energy, right? There's a risk of potentially labeling something that is not green as green, and then that's kind of an example for the world also to follow. So I think there's a very complex question here to answer. So Andreea, and then Anders.
So a couple of commentaries. One, the system in US works well, in my opinion, because it rewards greenhouse emission reductions. And this is just creating a wide playing field for companies to address. But it is very...
Sorry, Andreea, for those who perhaps are not that familiar with the US context, could we briefly explain a little bit, like, what is this about? So it's providing incentives?
Right, so there's three levels of incentives, and I happen to live in California, so I am personally impacted. I work in the system, so there's the federal RFS system, which rewards all opt-in fuels for sustainable aviation fuel. There's a blender's tax credit that is currently not renewed, but it's definitely a hot topic right now, because in the current proposal, or the legislation that was proposed before Christmas, looked like it was going to create the level playing field with ground fuel. So everybody was super excited about it. And then there is the California, what we call LCFS, which rewards greenhouse emission reductions. And this is actually a system where everybody pays into it. So it's not really like the traveler pays. It's quite different than what we're looking at in Europe. And I know this is a sensitive topic, so I don't want to open a can of worms, but I pay $1 more for my gasoline, and some of that money pays for the sustainable aviation fuel that is consumed in California. So those three types of financing systems are what's causing excitement about the West Coast market. And now Oregon and Washington have their LCFS programs, and British Columbia is talking about it as well. So certainly West Coast is leading on the carrot side with that. I just wanted to make one more comment on the carbon pricing, because that's very important to us. So aviation is a hard to decarbonize sector, and what that means is that the carbon pricing to make sustainable aviation fuel is many times higher than the carbon pricing for other sectors. So just a 60 euro per ton carbon will not pay to make SAF, which is why the mandates for SAF are so important, because without that, we cannot have, aviation will not get decarbonized. There will be other sectors that will decarbonize first, and we need to address this sector as well.
If I could also just interject, because there was some conversation earlier today about shipping, and I might add trucking to this as well, right? Increasingly, we're tending to look at this as a challenge to the, how do you decarbonize the mobility of people and goods around the planet? And we actually think that there are some synergies when you begin to look at transportation as a whole. Certainly policies in Europe that encourage the electrification of transportation. And I would argue that more needs to be done to encourage the electrification of trucking, for example, because when you do that, you actually are taking a positive step to free up fuel that can move into the harder to decarbonize sectors like shipping and aviation. And so I think that when you look at this from a comprehensive perspective and you say, what is the right strategy to get the most amount of decarbonization for the lowest cost for moving a particular set of goods or people around, it begins to expand your solution sets. So greater emphasis on electrification of trucking, which frees up both biological feedstocks and hydrogen that can then be used for ships and then can be used for aviation and maybe get some of those economies of scale that you were talking about.
If I may just a question. I just don't get it, because when we electrify cars, we have decided that an electric car is better than a diesel car. And then you go to a place in Germany and you know that all the electricity going into your car is brown coal. You have to tell me why it is so green. Because we don't have renewables enough today. I mean, we are striking now. We're going from the 12 gigawatt offshore wind power to 50 in 2030, 300 in 2050. But I mean, we electrify everything, but we don't have renewables. We just decided that the electric car is better than a diesel car. But it's because you don't look upon it as a life cycle thing.
Well, I think what I would suggest is there's two reasons why I say that. One is because, first of all, you're building a system that is going to take you into the future, right? So you're building an infrastructure that is not only designed to address your immediate transportation needs, but what you want your transportation system to look like in the future. Okay. It is pretty clear that the future of road transportation, both cars and trucks, is in electricity. So the sooner you get started on that, the sooner you can realize that future. As well, right, I take it on face value, what I have been seeing coming from the European Parliament and European Commission about the desire to move to 100% zero carbon electricity through renewables. So I take it on faith, right, that you as policymakers are following through on that, and that the grid is going to become increasingly greener over time. And of course, again, going back to the events of the last few weeks, right, the effort to decarbonize the electric sector is now going to be accelerated because of the liability of continuing to depend on gas for power generation. So both of these things are moving in that direction, okay? The sooner you move in that direction, the easier it is to then take those precious feedstocks that you have and move them into shipping and aviation, where electricity is not as good a solution.
Anders, please.
Yeah. I think the point on legitimacy is crucial. And it also feeds into this part of the conversation, because in the end, as an airline, we are completely agnostic to technology. We fly on electrons, bio, power to liquids. It doesn't matter. To us, it matters what we get, the bang we get for the buck, the carbon efficiency. And this is what Brussels can provide us with, the objective rules of the game.
Yes.
How do we calculate on a life cycle basis what the CO2 emissions or the climate effect is? Right now, we're blind. So we can't really make any investment decisions. And I don't take it as face value in the aviation sector that it's going to be best to fly on electricity. I don't, you know, so we need those rules of the game. And from you guys, from the producers, we need a coherent chain of custody with information. about every single batch that we buy. And I think we need to start sharing that information now, because in the end, it's going to be us who confronts the consumer. So if there is a claim of illegitimacy, or if there is a claim of non-compliance, or there is a claim of double counting, it's going to end up on my desk.
Mr. Gade, and then we conclude the panel. Yes.
Yeah, just to remark, I mean, today actually we looked into this particular issue, because when we put it on the of the provider of the fuel, of course, it begins and ends there. So it shouldn't be like this. If there's a fraud because the fuel supplier, he do a double whatever, you will not be the one who got the penalty. We are trying to put into the system. It is the supplier, and he has to be reliable. There has to be a kind of system, so we make sure that there is not a fraud on it. So we have discussed it today. I mean, we have taken it into the discussions yet, but I'm very much aware of what you just said. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. It's 4:12, which means that we are 2 minutes over time from our session right now. So, I mean, I think we had at least a very stimulating conversation among us. I think a lot to debate and to make sure that we get our EU policy framework and legislation right. So I would like all of you to give a big round of applause to our speakers.